She thought a quiet neighborhood would mean peace. Instead, the local cop demanded money, doubted her success, and finally pulled a gun on her own front lawn. But one phone call flipped the entire balance of power, drawing in top officials and exposing corruption hiding in plain sight. The trial that followed shocked the whole community and left everyone asking what respect and justice really mean. Before we dive in, get comfortable, relax, and hit like and subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's story. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Maplewood Grove, a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. Well-kept lawns stretched in front of cozy two-story homes, each with neat flower beds and American flags fluttering in the breeze. At 42, Cassandra Hayes stood on the porch of her new colonial-style house at 17 Magnolia Lane, sipping chamomile tea. She'd moved in 3 days ago, craving a break from her high-pressure job at the Pentagon. A senior advisor in the Department of Defense, Cassandra's sharp mind and steady demeanor had earned her respect in D.C., but her warm smile and soft laugh hid the weight of her responsibilities. At 5'6", with a fit build and a few silver streaks in her dark hair, she looked every bit the professional settling into a fresh start. The neighborhood felt peaceful. Kids rode bikes, neighbors waved, but she sensed eyes watching her, the only black woman on the block. Her new home, a cream-colored beauty with tall windows, was a reward for years of hard work, bought outright with her savings. As she admired the oak trees lining the street, a police cruiser rolled by slowly, its driver staring a bit too long. Officer Derek Larson, a stocky man in his late 30s with a buzz cut, lived a few houses down. He'd patrolled Maplewood for years, priding himself on knowing every face. To him, Cassandra's arrival in one of the priciest homes raised questions. How could she afford it? His gut told him something didn't add up, and he saw himself as the gatekeeper of this tight-knit community, deciding who fit in and who didn't. Cassandra set her mug down, her calm eyes narrowing as the cruiser circled back. Cassandra Hayes was unpacking boxes in her living room when she noticed the police cruiser pull up to her driveway again. It was Saturday morning, and the Maplewood Grove neighborhood hummed with the sound of lawnmowers and kids playing. She wiped her hands on her jeans and stepped onto the porch, her stomach tightening. Officer Derek Larson climbed out of the car, his boots heavy on the pavement. At 38, with a square jaw and a stern gaze, he carried himself like he owned the street. He adjusted his badge, his eyes scanning her house. 3,200 square feet of prime real estate that, in his mind, didn't quite match the woman standing before him. "Morning, Miss Hayes," he said, his voice flat, no warmth behind it. "Thought I'd swing by to check in. Settling in okay?" Cassandra nodded, keeping her tone polite. "Yes, thank you, Officer Larson. Just getting things organized." She stood tall, her arms crossed loosely, but she felt his stare, like he was sizing her up, looking for cracks. She'd seen that look before in her 15 years at the Department of Defense, navigating rooms where she was the only black woman. Larson stepped closer, his boots scuffing the brick path. "Nice place you got here," he said, glancing at the house. "Big investment. You must do pretty well for yourself. What's your line of work again?" His question wasn't casual. It carried an edge, like he was fishing for something to pin on her. "I'm a civil servant," Cassandra replied evenly, sticking to the basics. "I work for the government." She wasn't about to mention her role as a senior advisor at the Pentagon, not to a stranger, and definitely not to someone whose tone dripped with doubt. Larson raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching into a half-smile. "Civil servant, huh? That's vague. Gotta be something big to afford a house like this." He paused, letting the words hang. "You know, Maplewood's a safe place, but it takes work to keep it that way. Folks around here, they chip in sometimes, call it a community fund. Helps me keep an extra eye on things, especially for newcomers. Houses like yours, they can attract attention." Cassandra's jaw tightened. She knew exactly what he was implying. A shakedown dressed up as neighborly concern. At 42, she'd dealt with enough bullies to recognize one, badge or not. "I appreciate the offer, officer," she said, her voice steady but firm. "But I'm good. I trust the police department to do their job. My taxes cover that, don't they?" Larson's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't used to being turned down, especially not by someone he'd already decided didn't belong. "Taxes, sure," he said, his tone sharper now. "But things happen. Break-ins, accidents. A little goodwill goes a long way to make sure you're looked after. Most folks here get that." Cassandra held his gaze, unflinching. "I understand the community, Officer Larson, but I don't pay extra for protection. That's not how it works." Her words were calm, deliberate, but they carried the weight of someone who knew her rights. Larson's face reddened, his hands flexing at his sides. "Suit yourself," he snapped, turning back to his cruiser. "Hope you don't regret playing it that way." He climbed in, the engine roaring as he pulled away, leaving Cassandra standing on her porch, her heart pounding, but her resolve unbroken. She knew this wasn't the end of it. The following Tuesday afternoon, Cassandra Hayes was trimming the rose bushes in her front yard, the warm North Carolina sun casting long shadows across Maplewood Grove. The neighborhood was quiet, with only the distant hum of a neighbor's sprinkler breaking the stillness. She wore a light blue t-shirt and gardening gloves, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. At 42, she moved with purpose, but her sharp eyes caught the familiar police cruiser turning onto Magnolia Lane. Her grip tightened on the clippers. Officer Derek Larson wasn't just passing by this time. He pulled right into her driveway, blocking her silver SUV. The car door slammed, and he strode toward her, his stocky frame tense, his face set in a scowl. No pretense of a friendly check-in today. Cassandra set the clippers down on the grass and stood up, brushing dirt off her hands. She kept her expression neutral, but her pulse quickened. She'd known Larson wouldn't let her refusal slide. At 5'6", she stood her ground as he stopped a few feet away, his boots planted wide like he was claiming the space. "We need to talk, Hayes," he said, skipping any greeting. His voice was low, clipped, like he was holding back a storm. "I gave you time to think about that community fund I mentioned. What's it gonna be? You in or not?" Cassandra crossed her arms, her brown eyes locking onto his. "I was clear last time, Officer Larson," she said, calm but firm. "I'm not paying any fees. I don't owe you anything beyond what the law requires." Her years at the Pentagon had taught her how to handle pressure without flinching, but she felt the weight of his stare. Cold, judgmental, like he'd already made up his mind about her. Larson's jaw clenched, his fair skin flushing red. "You don't get it, do you?" he snapped, stepping closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "This is my neighborhood. I keep things in order here. Everyone plays ball, pays their share to keep things smooth. You think you can just move in, buy a big house like this, and act like you're above the rules?" His voice rose, sharp with accusation. "How's a woman like you even afford a place like this, huh? What's your deal?" Cassandra's stomach twisted, but she didn't back down. She knew what he meant by a woman like you. She'd heard that tone before, dripping with assumptions about her race, her place. "My deal," she said evenly, "is I worked hard, saved up, and bought my home. That's all you need to know. You're out of line, officer." "Out of line?" Larson laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. He took another step, his shadow falling over her. "You're the one who doesn't belong here. Fancy government job or not, you don't get to waltz into Maplewood and disrespect me. I've been here for 12 years. I know how things work." His voice dropped, venomous now. "Bet you're hiding something. Nobody buys a house this nice without some kind of hustle. What is it, connections? Something shady? You think I won't dig into it?" Cassandra's heart pounded, anger rising in her chest. She'd faced skepticism her whole career, but this, standing in her own yard, being insulted by a man with a badge, was different. Still, she kept her cool, her voice steady as steel. "You're wrong, Larson. I earned everything I have, and I'm not intimidated by you. What you're doing is harassment. It's illegal, and you know it." "Illegal?" he spat, his face twisting with rage. "You don't tell me what's legal. I'm the law here!" His hand jabbed the air, pointing at her chest, inches from her. "You're nobody in this town. Keep acting like this, and you'll see how fast things go bad for you. Break-ins happen. Records get checked. You want that kind of trouble?" His words were a thinly veiled threat, each one landing like a stone. Cassandra took a slow breath, refusing to let him see her rattled. "You're threatening me now?" she said, her tone icy. "That's a mistake. I know my rights, and I'm not afraid to use them. You need to leave my property. Now." Larson froze, her defiance catching him off guard. His eyes blazed with fury, and for a moment she thought he might back off. But his pride, bruised and raw, pushed him further. "You think you're tough?" he growled. His hand dropped to his holster, fingers brushing the grip of his service pistol. In one swift motion, he pulled it out, not aiming directly at her, but holding it low, the black barrel glinting in the sunlight. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "I'm giving you one last chance. Pay up or you'll wish you had. Things happen to people who don't play nice." The air felt heavy. The neighborhood's calm shattered. Cassandra's breath caught, but her training kicked in. Years of handling crises at the Department of Defense, staying steady under pressure. She saw the tremor in his hand, the desperation in his eyes. He wasn't just a bully now, he was dangerous. "Put that gun away," she said, her voice low and commanding. "You're making a big mistake, Larson, bigger than you realize." Larson's grip tightened, his knuckles white. "Don't test me," he hissed. "I'm not playing games." The pistol stayed out, a silent threat as he waited for her to break. But Cassandra stood tall, her mind racing. She wasn't just a homeowner in his eyes. She was a challenge to everything he thought he controlled, and that made him reckless. Cassandra Hayes stood firm in her front yard, the late afternoon sun warm on her face as Officer Derek Larson loomed before her, his pistol still drawn, pointed low but menacing. The quiet of Maplewood Grove felt suffocating, the weight of his threat hanging heavy. At 42, Cassandra had faced tough situations in her career at the Pentagon. But this, being targeted in her own home, tested her like never before. Her heart raced, but she kept her eyes locked on Larson's, refusing to show fear. His hand shook slightly, his confidence fraying as she didn't back down. "You're gonna regret this," he growled, his voice tight. "Last chance, Hayes." Cassandra's mind moved fast. She couldn't reason with him. He was too far gone, blinded by anger and pride. But she wasn't helpless. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into the pocket of her jeans, her movements calm to avoid startling him. Larson's eyes narrowed, the gun twitching in his grip. "What are you doing?" he snapped, his voice cracking. "Don't try anything stupid." "I'm not," Cassandra said evenly, pulling out her smartphone. She held it up, her thumb steady as she swiped to her contacts. Larson's face twisted in confusion, his bravado slipping. She scrolled to a name saved simply as General Carter and hit the call, raising the phone to her ear without breaking eye contact. The line rang once, twice, then clicked. "General Carter, this is Cassandra Hayes," she said, her voice clear, professional, but carrying just enough urgency. "I'm at my new home, 17 Magnolia Lane, Maplewood Grove. I've got a problem with a local officer, Derek Larson, badge number 582. Larson's jaw dropped, the color draining from his face. Cassandra kept going, her tone measured but loud enough for him to hear every word. He's standing in my yard, pointing a gun at me, demanding I pay him some kind of protection fee." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I need your assistance, sir." The gun in Larson's hand wavered, his eyes wide with panic. "Wait, hold on!" he stammered, stepping back. "Who are you calling? What's going on?" His voice shook as the reality hit him. General Thomas Carter wasn't just any contact. He was a high-ranking official at the Department of Defense, someone Cassandra worked closely with. Larson's mind raced, piecing it together. She wasn't just a civil servant. She was someone with connections, power, someone he'd horribly misjudged. The pistol felt like a lead weight in his hand now, his arrogance crumbling into raw fear as he realized the mess he'd made. Cassandra stayed calm, her gaze unflinching, waiting for the call to change everything. Sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the tense silence of Maplewood Grove as Cassandra Hayes stood in her front yard, phone still pressed to her ear. Officer Derek Larson's face was ghost white, his pistol now limp at his side, forgotten as the weight of his mistake sank in. The late afternoon light glinted off the badge he'd worn with pride for 12 years. But that pride was gone now, replaced by raw panic. Cassandra lowered her phone, her call to General Thomas Carter already complete. She'd given him the details: Larson's threats, the gun, the so-called protection fee. At 42, her years as a senior advisor at the Pentagon had taught her how to stay composed, and she stood tall, her eyes never leaving Larson's. Before he could stammer another excuse, 2 police cruisers and a black SUV screeched to a stop in front of 17 Magnolia Lane, their red and blue lights flashing across the neatly trimmed lawns. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, sensing something big. The SUV's door swung open, and Sheriff Robert Kane stepped out. In his early 50s, with a broad build and graying hair, Kane carried the authority of someone who'd run the county's police force for a decade. He wasn't in uniform, called away from a family barbecue, but his sharp eyes took in the scene. Cassandra, calm and unshaken, and Larson, a sweating mess, his gun still in hand. "Derek," Kane barked, striding across the yard. "Drop that weapon now!" Larson fumbled, the pistol hitting the grass with a dull thud. He raised his hands, his voice shaking. "Sheriff, it's a misunderstanding, I swear!" But Kane wasn't having it. He had known Cassandra's name the second General Carter called him, relaying her report. A high-ranking Defense Department official being threatened in his jurisdiction? That was a disaster. And Larson was at the center of it. "Hand over your badge and radio," Kane ordered, his voice like steel. Larson's hands trembled as he unclipped his badge and radio, passing them over like a man in a daze. "You're done for today. Suspended, effective immediately. Get in the cruiser." He jerked his thumb toward one of the squad cars, where 2 deputies waited, their faces grim. Larson opened his mouth, maybe to beg, but one look at Kane's expression shut him up. Head down, he shuffled to the car, the deputies guiding him into the back. The door slammed and the cruiser pulled away, leaving a stunned quiet behind. Kane turned to Cassandra, his face softening with regret. "Miss Hayes, I'm so sorry you went through this," he said, his voice low. "Larson's actions are unacceptable, a disgrace to my department. I'll handle this personally." Cassandra nodded, her arms crossed. "Thank you, Sheriff. I just want this dealt with fairly." Kane gave a firm nod. "It will be. I promise you that." He signaled the deputies to secure Larson's gun as evidence, then headed to his SUV, already planning the investigation. Cassandra watched him go, her heart still racing, but her resolve stronger than ever. The investigation into Officer Derek Larson's actions kicked off the very next morning, with Sheriff Robert Kane overseeing every step. His office at the Maplewood Grove precinct was buzzing, papers stacked high, as deputies compiled evidence from the scene at 17 Magnolia Lane. Cassandra Hayes, still settling into her new home, sat down with investigators just 2 days after the incident, her account clear and unflinching. At 42, her role as a senior advisor at the Pentagon gave her words weight. But it was her calm, detailed testimony that painted a vivid picture. Larson's demand for a community fund, his hostile accusations, and the moment he pulled his gun to intimidate her. She described how he'd questioned her right to own her 200-square-foot home. His words laced with assumptions about her as a black woman. Her statement, delivered in a steady voice, left no room for doubt. Sheriff Kane was determined to root out any corruption in his force, especially after a call from General Thomas Carter underscored the gravity of the situation. The investigation moved fast. Deputies collected Larson's service pistol, still lying in Cassandra's yard when they arrived, and pulled footage from a neighbor's security camera that caught part of the confrontation. Larson was called in, his usual swagger gone. At first, he tried to spin a story, claimed it was a misunderstanding, said he was just checking on a new resident. But when faced with Cassandra's testimony and the video evidence, he cracked. He admitted to asking for money, saying it was a local custom, and confessed to drawing his gun, though he insisted he never meant to hurt her. It was a weak excuse, and Kane wasn't buying it. Larson's personnel file was another blow. Over his 12 years, there'd been complaints, residents noting his heavy-handed attitude, a few mentions of unfair treatment. None had been serious enough to act on. But now they formed a pattern. Kane saw it as a failure of oversight, and he wasn't about to let it slide. Cassandra's case exposed flaws in the system, and Kane vowed to fix them. By the end of the week, the investigation wrapped up with a clear conclusion. Larson had abused his authority, tried to extort money, and threatened a citizen with a deadly weapon. Kane signed the order to fire him immediately, ending his career in disgrace. But it didn't stop there. Recognizing the severity of Larson's actions, using his badge to bully and intimidate, Kane handed the case over to the county district attorney. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence and didn't hesitate. Larson faced serious charges: extortion for demanding payment under the guise of protection, assault with a deadly weapon for brandishing his gun, and official misconduct for abusing his position. Each charge carried weight, reflecting how he'd betrayed the public's trust. Cassandra agreed to cooperate fully, ready to testify if needed. Kane met with her at her home, promising transparency. "We're cleaning the house," he told her, his face grim but resolute. "Larson's actions don't represent us." Cassandra nodded, relieved but still shaken, knowing the road to justice was just beginning. Larson, now a former officer, awaited his day in court, his future hanging in the balance. The courtroom in downtown Charlotte was packed 3 months later, the air thick with tension as Derek Larson's trial began. Maplewood Grove's former officer sat at the defense table, his face pale and drawn, a far cry from the confident man who'd patrolled the neighborhood. At 38, he faced charges of extortion, assault with a deadly weapon, and official misconduct, crimes that had stunned the community. Cassandra Hayes, now settled into her home at 17 Magnolia Lane, walked into the courtroom with quiet confidence. At 42, the senior Pentagon advisor wore a simple navy blazer, her dark hair neatly pulled back. She'd carved out time from her busy schedule to testify, determined to see justice done. The prosecution laid out an airtight case. Cassandra took the stand, her voice steady as she recounted the events of that Tuesday afternoon. Larson's demands for a community fund, his accusations about her home, and the chilling moment he pulled his gun. She spoke clearly, focusing on facts, not emotion, describing how he'd questioned her right to live in Maplewood Grove because she was a black woman. Her role at the Department of Defense wasn't the point. She was a homeowner, a citizen, and Larson had crossed every line. The jury listened closely, some shaking their heads as she detailed the threats. Security footage from a neighbor's camera and Larson's own admissions during the investigation backed her up, leaving little room for doubt. Larson's lawyer tried to soften the blow, arguing stress and a momentary lapse had driven him to act out of character. But the evidence was overwhelming. Larson himself stayed quiet, eyes down, unable to meet Cassandra's gaze. After a short deliberation, just under 3 hours, the jury returned. "Guilty," the foreman said, reading out each charge: extortion, assault, misconduct. The room buzzed, a few gasps echoing from the back. At sentencing, the judge didn't hold back. A gray-haired woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, she leaned forward, her voice firm. "Mr. Larson, you wore a badge meant to protect, but you used it to intimidate and extort," she said. "Your actions, driven by prejudice and greed, harmed not just Miss Hayes, but the trust we place in law enforcement." She noted the gun, the racial undertones, and his abuse of power, calling it a betrayal of his oath. For the charges combined, she sentenced him to 5 years in prison, a punishment that hit like a gavel's bang. Larson's shoulders slumped, his future behind bars sealed. Cassandra left the courthouse, the spring air cool against her skin. She felt no joy, only a quiet relief that the system had worked. Larson's downfall was a lesson, one she hoped others would hear loud and clear. No one, not even a cop, was above accountability. Cassandra Hayes stood on her porch at 17 Magnolia Lane, a mug of chamomile tea warming her hands as the evening sun dipped below the oak trees of Maplewood Grove. Weeks had passed since Derek Larson's trial, and the neighborhood felt calm again. Kids biking past, neighbors nodding hello. At 42, Cassandra felt a quiet strength settle in her bones. The ordeal hadn't broken her. It had reminded her why she'd climbed the ranks at the Pentagon, fighting for fairness in a world that sometimes looked at her and saw only her skin. She thought about justice, how it had prevailed, but also how fragile it could be. If she hadn't been a senior advisor with connections, would Larson have faced consequences? That question lingered, pushing her to keep advocating, to ensure no one else had to stand alone against a bully with a badge. Life taught her that respect isn't owned. It's earned through actions, not titles or uniforms. Prejudice, she knew, could hide in plain sight, even in a place as welcoming as Maplewood. But courage, standing tall, speaking truth, could dismantle it. Cassandra vowed to live that truth every day, whether in DC boardrooms or her own front yard. She wanted her story to spark change, to remind others they could challenge wrong, no matter who they were. True peace came from knowing you'd done right, not just from a quiet street. She sipped her tea, her resolve firm. This is why I stay in the fight, she thought, for a world where everyone belongs. If her story moved even one person to act with kindness or stand up for what's fair, it was worth sharing. If you're inspired, hit like and subscribe to our channel. Join us for more stories that matter, because tomorrow, we've got another one waiting for you.